This week was Apple's biggest conference of the year, WWDC 2025. And recently, Apple's not been in the news for many positive things. And spoiler alert, it only got worse. The conference can only really be described as disappointing at best. And what made it even worse was, just before the conference, Apple's team launched a research paper. This research paper basically took a swipe at all the big AI labs, saying that large language models never reason, they've only ever memorized. In today's episode, we're going to discuss the conference, the research paper, and the fact that Jony Ive, Apple's most historically important designer ever, has just joined OpenAI, and explain why I think this spells a lot of trouble for Apple. This is In the Loop with Jack Hort, and I hope you enjoy the show. So let's start at this year's big keynote at the Apple WWDC conference, where usually they would announce the most exciting new updates and features and strategies of the year. And you're probably expecting some form of AI news or Siri updates or something really interesting. So with that in mind, what do we think the big headline was? In actual fact, their big headline of the year was that they've revolutionized user interface with something they're calling liquid glass. Now, before you get too excited, let me translate this from marketing speak to human speak. They basically took a trend called glass morphism from 2022 and probably arguably 2016 Windows and slapped a new brand name on it, just like they did with Apple Intelligence. If you've never heard of glass morphism, it's a design fad where everything looked like frosted bathroom windows. Renaming this to liquid glass, just like their Apple Intelligence rebrand, is something we should all start to learn from, which is branding is more important apparently than substance. And if we keep going in this direction of liquid glass or frosted glass windows on bathrooms, I guess eventually user interfaces will just be invisible, which, to say the least, is not very accessible. For those that are hard of sight, good luck trying to navigate their frosted windows app store. What I find particularly funny is that Windows actually did this with Windows Vista about 15 years ago. And anyone that remembers Vista would know how that turned out, which is probably the worst operating system update in history. And I found some quite funny tweets about this. Tom Warren on Twitter, or X, said that I can't wait to not be able to read anything on the new iPhone. And I think that summed it all up. This might make me seem like an Apple hater, which is just not the case at all. I've got an Apple Mac, I've got an iPhone, I've got an iPad. So I'm actually the opposite, but I'm incredibly disappointed in them. And I think, to be honest, they're in big trouble. And I'll come on to exactly the reasons I think that is going to be true. This is why they're in trouble, because they're so far behind on Siri. And the fact that they can't have a unified vision of what Siri is supposed to be is kind of crazy to me, because OpenAI are literally telling them what they should do, which is a universal assistant on every single device. That's what Sam Altman came on a stage, and that's their vision for what AI is supposed to be. And this isn't just a small little problem that Apple are facing. This disaster has been brewing for over a decade. I think it's a masterclass on how to completely fumble one of the biggest tech revolutions, probably since the smartphone. So if we start with Siri, because that's where this whole mess started, Siri was launched in 2011, so 14 years ago, and somehow it's gotten arguably worse. And meanwhile, Google have launched their Gemini, where you can actually have real-life conversations. It understands context of the app and the screen. You can have your camera holding up to things in the real world and it can tell you what it sees, and it integrates in all applications. And one of the reasons for this complete fumble is that Apple have been at war with itself for years. Until very recently, John Giandrea was head of AI at Apple, and Apple poached this person from Google in 2018 to run all of Apple's AI efforts. When this happened, the head of software at Apple, so Craig Federighi, apparently had zero faith in this person. And what he did is he started a competing AI team. So that's right, Apple had two separate AI teams in the same company fighting for the same resources, trying to build competing products. The team under Federighi actually nicknamed that other team as the Aimless. So you know that company culture is probably quite problematic when employees are creating nicknames that are very toxic and negative about each other. And it gets even better. When ChatGPT launched, Giandrea basically said that LLMs have very limited utility in the world. This culture sounds very much like the early days of Apple when Steve Jobs was, to be honest, rampaging around Apple, doing incredible things, but being quite divisive. Now, this dysfunction got so bad this year that Tim Cook apparently lost all confidence in Andrea and strict control of Siri from them, and actually handed it to Mike Rockwell, who was the person behind the Vision Pro. So the Apple Vision Pro, if you remember that, it's the $3,500 headset that probably about 1,000 people bought. And it goes well beyond just the culture with their AI efforts, because Apple's internal data centers are running on about 50,000 GPUs. Many of them were 5 years old, and their AI teams have been begging the likes of Google and Amazon just to get enough computing power to train the models. So that's the same Google and Amazon they're actually trying to compete with. And then if we go back in time, when we remember that Apple was promising all these amazing AI features that are going to be ready for the iPhone 16 launch, well, it turns out only half of the promised chip budget got approved because the Apple CFO told the AI teams just to do more with less. So when all the other big companies see that AI is actually the next big computing platform and are spending really big, Apple cut their AI team's budget in half. Now, I'm not saying spending more equals better results, but if you're a technology company and you're not spending more, making big bets and willing to rip up the entire playbook or business model, I think you're in deep trouble. The idea of product market fit, so when a product aligns with a market and a need and a want, is something that every company is lost right now. Because every single person's needs and wants are changing so fast because of this new technology. And what frustrates me most about Apple right now is that Steve Jobs would have cut 75% of the fat when it comes to Apple. So he'd have cancelled every product that wasn't going to deliver triple-digit growth. He would have ruthlessly cut teams and made everyone incredibly focused and aligned on what was most important. And I guarantee he would have been in the office of the software and the design teams every single day, making sure this thing happened. And this type of energy with a founder or a leader or a visionary who is in the office with the team day in, day out, driving those outcomes is something that Steve Jobs was famous for, and I guarantee something that has been lost over the last few years. And this comes to the second reason I think they're in trouble, which is their way of thinking about the world. And this comes to the point of that research paper. So Apple know they're behind. And their answer wasn't to try and make big bets. For example, I suggested about 10 episodes or so ago that if I was Apple, I would spend a huge amount of money to buy an AI lab and just leapfrog everybody and own our own model. So we own every inch of the stack and we can triple down on that user experience across all interfaces and every device because Apple can own the stack. That's always been their strategy. And instead, they've not done any of that. They've released a research paper arguing basically that all of these large language models are rubbish and they're not actually reasoning. Tim Cook must have genuinely been furious because this became the backdrop of the conference, right around the time of their annual conference, the WWDC 2025, when everyone was expecting Apple to have some kind of cool breakthrough, and instead they dropped a paper called The Illusion of Thinking, Understanding the Strengths and Limitations of Reasoning Models. Now, let me break down what this paper actually claimed because it's important to understand. So Apple researchers tested AI models on a puzzle called the Tower of Hanoi, which is basically a game which stacks rings and you have to move disks from one pole to another without putting a bigger disk on a small one. It's a logic puzzle with a known algorithmic solution. And their big finding was that AI started failing when the puzzle got too complex. So Claude could handle about 6 disks, it struggled with 7 and gave up at 8. And the conclusion was that AI models therefore don't reason, they just pattern match really, really well. Now, of course, this was a great day for many AI skeptics, namely Gary Marcus, who has been quite famous in AI, Twitter, and social media circles for trying to make a career out of basically being incredibly pessimistic about AI. And he tried to call it a knockout blow for LLMs. And obviously lots of people were sharing this online too. That being said, my personal opinion, plus many researchers I'll go into, is that it's just all rubbish and it really doesn't matter. For example, many pointed out that AI models weren't failing because they couldn't reason. They were failing because they were hitting token limits, which is the equivalent of running out of space to write their answers on a piece of paper. One researcher called Lisan Al-Gab actually replicated the exact experiment and found that models were literally telling the researchers they couldn't complete the tasks due to the output constraints. So instead of just giving up, the models would explain the algorithm for solving the puzzle and create the code to implement it. In other words, the AI was smart enough to recognize its limitations and provide alternative solutions, but Apple's researchers said They interpreted this as proof that AI doesn't actually reason. And what was also reported is that Apple researchers actually prevented the AI models from writing code to solve the problems. And they acted surprised when the models couldn't solve coding problems without being allowed to code. And when other researchers let the AI models use their full set of capabilities, so reasoning, researching, writing, coding, they solved the puzzle really easily, even with hundreds of disks. So my take here is that Apple is really in trouble if it doesn't start to change its thinking fast. Again, this Twitter post sums it up perfectly. Be Apple, richest company in the world. Every advantage imaginable, go all in on AI, make countless promises, get immediately lapped by everyone. Then 2 years into the race with nothing to show for it, you give up, write a paper about how it's all fake anyway, and it really doesn't matter. Now, I don't think it even matters if models reason or not, because most of us care whether this model does a thing better than the last model and faster, not the academic definition of reasoning. Now, that's not to say these debates shouldn't happen. They really should. But Apple making this their issue to focus on is just madness. They're a consumer company. They care about what everyday people and customers want to do faster and easier. And this gets us to the third and final reason I think they're in trouble. And this one I find particularly interesting. And the third reason is that their core business might not be there forever. And if it is there, it's going to change. And as we've seen, I have very little faith in them executing and importantly managing that change. A good example of this change is Jony Ive and Sam Altman. And now if you don't know Jony Ive, other than probably Steve Jobs and Tim Cook, there would literally be no Apple today without him. He was this legendary designer that came up with his team for most of the concepts between the iPod, the iPhone, iPad, and basically every iconic Apple product that ever made the company what it is today. And he just joined OpenAI. So let that sink in for a moment. Apple's most famous and most important designer ever, the guy who literally shaped the modern tech aesthetic, who turned Apple from a computer company into a lifestyle brand, has now sold his business to OpenAI and partnered with Sam Altman on creating what they call the next generation device of the AI era. Sam Altman aims to ship 100 million AI devices and thinks that this collaboration could add $1 trillion in value to OpenAI. And with a number of leaked meeting recordings, Sam Altman described their secret device as something that will be fully aware of a user's surroundings, unobtrusive enough to rest in someone's pocket or a desk, and positioned as a third core device that a person would put on their desk after a MacBook and an iPhone. So while Apple is making their apps on their phones look a little bit more transparent and publishing papers on how AI doesn't even really work properly, their former design genius is literally building the future AI hardware with one of their biggest potential competitors, because OpenAI is the leader in consumer AI. That's where a massive chunk of OpenAI's revenue comes from. And this is just one example of people trying to invent the next consumer device. Take Meta. They've actually partnered with Ray-Ban on glasses that take great photos and videos. The audio quality is apparently really good. And obviously they're stylish enough to probably make people wear them because it's Ray-Ban. And now Google is doing the exact same. They're partnering with Warby Parker. And if Google started shipping very nice looking glasses powered by Gemini with real-time, say, translation, vision AI search, and integrated into all of their services, what is Apple going to compete with? Siri? Now, I can't say if any of these potential devices could really take over the iPhone, but again, I don't believe that Apple could react and change and execute properly on this, if it did. So I'll give you one final important take before I say goodbye today. I don't think this is about AI or design language or corporate dysfunction. I think it's about a company that's built its entire modern identity on being ahead of the curve and taking existing technology and making it so much better and redefining entire product categories. The iPhone wasn't the first smartphone, but it was one of the few that didn't suck. Apple's whole thing was let others fumble around and then we'll turn up and do it right. This time they're turning up very late, empty-handed, relying on other people's technologies, and are spending time publishing research papers that seem to me quite petty. And the tragic part is this was avoidable. Siri was around in 2011. They had a 7-year head start. But instead of building on that advantage, they let internal politics and egos and nonsense destroy any potential progress they could have made. And whilst all of this was happening, OpenAI was just busy changing the world. I don't want to be completely unfair here. Apple still makes good products. But as someone that has loved the way Apple have produced industrial design at scale and appreciated how difficult it is to create such incredible products that so many people love and built their entire brand on think different, well, it just leaves me very disappointed. And it's a big lesson of what not to do if you're a leader of an organization right now. Embrace, focus, and start making bets. Otherwise, you'll probably regret it in a few years. Anyway, thanks for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And as always, share this into a Slack channel or WhatsApp chat to a friend that loves Apple and may want to hear an interesting perspective. See you next week.